Welcome to SouthCoast Matters. I'm Paul Latendra.
And I'm Julie Taylor. And SouthCoast Matters is a public access television program where we bring together business leaders, civic leaders, and citizens to see how we can work in harmony to have a positive impact on our South Coast communities.
And we try to have interesting conversations with some intelligent people, and we try to learn a few things along the way. Today's our second show with Dr. Kristen Lee Costa. And if you missed the first show, you might be able to catch it on Vimeo. If you look up, go to Vimeo, look up SouthCoast Matters. You can see it there. Dr. Costa is the author of Reset,
Make the most of your stress.
Make the most of your stress. I always get stressed out when I try to remember saying that.
So Dr. Kris received her doctorate and is now the lead faculty of behavioral sciences at Northeastern University. Your book was the winner of the Next Generation Indie Book Awards Motivational Book of 2015. You're a regular contributor to Huffington Post and Psychology Today, and you've been featured on NPR and CBS Radio and now TCAM TV. And you're also the mother of a 20-year-old and a 16-year-old and an avid, if not obsessive, runner.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Kris, often on this show we talk about how the country's become so polarized and how fear and anger seem to fuel negative energy and hate. And that negative energy and hate seem to steamroll and snowball into further fear and anger, and it becomes a vicious cycle. And how can we gain some positive energy out of the life we're living and the times we're living in? You know, and I want to pick your brain on that because it's I think it's a big issue in living in today's world.
Absolutely. And first of all, thank you. It's so good to be with you again today. And it's a question that I think is burning on the hearts and minds of all of us. We live in a very polarized socio-political climate right now, where we have these 2-second sound bites. People are fighting, people are angry, people are locking down, and we've really lost the ability to listen thoughtfully to one another. And as a clinical social worker throughout my whole life, I've worked in Fall River, New Bedford through my whole career span. I've seen just amazing things in that, and I know that there's great needs, and we really need all of our bandwidth. We need all our resources to be devoted to the types of change, the types of improvements that will help us all. But unfortunately, instead, there's just so much frustration and so much fear-mongering that are really triggering people into emotional disarray. And I think it's going to be great for us to talk today about ways we can think a little bit differently. It's very easy for us to get baited into these types of fears, you know, and the media is very strong in terms of influencing us and getting that switch tripped up, so to speak. And we really have to be critical thinkers. We talk a lot about this in my classroom at Northeastern. How do we think about what's being said, who's saying it, why are they saying it, and how it may or may not be very useful. And it might not even be true.
Right.
In your book, you talk about using your heart and thinking with your mind. I think in my experience, we always talked about being from the gut rather than probably a male thing. We don't have hearts, we have guts. But, where so much appeals to our gut reactions, I think, and we respond emotionally rather than react intelligently.
Yes.
And I know when I was in business, when I trained a lot of different people, and one of my mantras would always be respond, don't react, respond, don't react. And basically I picked up that mantra because it's what I have to tell myself all the time, because my initial reaction is to strike back, or you know. And I think the news cycles we see today are basically baiting us to strike rather than think.
That's right.
And how do we get past that? Because I do strike. I see it and I say, son of a bitch, he's right. But he's not always right. You know, that 2-second soundbite might be right. But when you expand it and think about it, well, it's not so right. You know, it might be partially right. But
yes. Well, I love your saying, and I think it is important for us to have those go-to mantras or strategies we can remind ourselves of when we feel, you know, just that 0 to 60 kind of moment, or just that sense of emotional arousal. what's very interesting, if we took it from kind of just a quick brain science 101 perspective, in our brain we have an amygdala, and this is what fires off the chemical reactions, the cortisol and adrenaline in our systems that causes us to get very emotional very quickly. And these responses sometimes really get in the way of the rational thinking and us be able to do that bigger picture perspective taking, if you will, look at the greater picture and look at all the information coming in and weed through it. I think this is more important than ever. They're calling this age an age of anxiety and an age of infobesity. They're saying we're taking in the equivalent now of 171 newspapers a day. So we're flooded, right, with all this information we're trying to make sense of. And it's very easy just, again, to sort of grab and go, take what we're seeing, and fly by the seats of our emotional pants instead of being rational thinkers. And this is obviously hugely detrimental. It's affecting our ability to, you know, Daniel Kahneman is one of my favorite researchers in this area, so he's a behavioral economist. And what he talks about is that we think we can trust our gut instincts, right? I feel like that. You know, I've been a mental health clinician for a long time. I've been a parent for a long time. I've always had good intuition. I think I'm right about stuff. You know, I trust myself. But his research kind of overturned that and said, again, our brains are kind of unruly creatures. And again, within the context of today, we can get baited into making very inaccurate decisions that have an ill effect on us all. So I'm excited to talk about this with you today because it's really important.
I read recently that the amygdala sends signals about 20 times as fast as the brain.
Yes.
So, and I guess that goes back to when we prehistorically we needed that quick signal, because if we were sleeping and a lion walked by or something, we needed that quick wake up.
That's right, that's right.
And that adrenaline rush, that fear. But I think some politicians, television shows, good drama knows how to get that amygdala working.
If you look at the context today and the types of conversations that are happening, you know, it sinks their teeth right into the fears in us and just gets us going, rather than being able to be thoughtful. Mm-hmm.
You know, that is so true, I think, with the whole immigration issue, where the different politicians have said, well, they're bad, they're taking your jobs, or they're going to come take benefits, and you're going to pay tax dollars to support them, blah, blah, blah. But so how do we try to change that conversation? What are some of the things we could do to change that conversation?
How can we bring some positive energy? Because I've seen positive energy work and it's contagious. Watch the Red Sox when they're going strong. I mean, you can almost see when they're going to pull ahead, when they're going to come back. It's you can see the energy and feel it. You know.
We really need to get some traction, right? We need to get some traction and some momentum, because again, all of the ways in which this negativity, becomes so toxic and so consuming, and we get really stuck. And then again, all of our minds and our resources are devoted to fighting and sort of, again, locking down on a position or a side. And you brought up the position of immigration. What that makes me think about is sort of this idea of othering. So that's a fancy way of saying, we often, have our own interests in mind, and we sometimes we marginalize people that are different than us. We get sort of on this high horse. We think, it's very interesting, the conversation, because most everybody here is an immigrant in some generation or not, whatnot. Right. And it's very interesting because a lot of times we say, like, this is our territory. We get very territorial, or we think, we want to keep things a certain way. But we really limit human potential and progress when we get so angry. And I think what can help us get traction and help us, get some positive energy, as you put it, is this idea of what I like to call in my work universal regard. So that just means that we have a positive, sense of humanity and shared humanity with everybody across the globe. We live in a global society, and we have unprecedented opportunities to connect and to learn from one another. And I see this in action all the time in my classroom at Northeastern. Oftentimes when I walk through the doors of the first night of class, I'm maybe, one of two Americans in the classroom, and every student represents a different culture. And you would not, that is my favorite thing about my job. I mean, to be able to talk, and most of what I teach is obviously behavioral science and mental health focus, and my bread and butter class I teach is stress and its management. So we really get into thinking about, our collective well-being and talking about it from that cross-cultural perspective. And it's so rich, right? It's amazing the conversations we can have. And I think what we need to do is start shifting away from this idea of, us versus them or othering, but really look at, again, that we're all humans. And when you do well, I do well. When someone does not so well, we all suffer. And we know this is true when it comes to any of the ill things in society, the isms such as according to race, class, gender, sexual orientation, age, ability, religion. There's a lot of disparities and discrimination. And people sometimes are surprised, they first see my book and they think, oh, it's just that another self-help book or psychology. But what we have to do is really contextualize ourselves and understand that this type of context where there's so much hate and there's such a lack of understanding is quite damaging. And again, it kind of consumes us to the point where we're not able to then put our minds together thoughtfully about what we have in common, what our common values are, right? And how we can work thoughtfully to actually pay attention to the enormous opportunities around us to make things better. So thinking about our local schools, I did my research actually in the New Bedford and Fall River schools. I was looking at urban teacher burnout. And in that, there were a lot of very interesting discoveries. One being this idea of othering. Everybody thinks urban school and they think deficit, problems, these kids, those teachers, the principals, everybody is pointing fingers all the time. And what we're not doing is thinking systemically that we're living in a hyper-competitive market. Our economy, our post-9/11 economy is very difficult, so resources are very scarce, we're all stretched. And what we have to do is stop blaming and start thinking again about this universal regard, this idea that how do we look at our strengths, how do we look at our assets, our resources, how do we spend our time problem solving and putting our heads together and linking arms instead of wrangling. I mean, nothing is ever solved by hate or fear. And I know we were talking about this before the show, but in a lot of ways, many of the conditions across the world have improved dramatically. There's a lot of good things to celebrate, but we're often just thinking about the negative spin. Again, politicians can be culprits, but we all can put our spin on things according to our own agendas, right? And what we have to do is become more critically thoughtful about, again, what's coming at us, how we make sense of it, and then what kinds of actions do we take individually, what is our own responsibility that we can take, and then what do we do as a society to say, we're not going to buy into this baloney anymore, as my dad would say. We're not going to do this anymore because it's really harmful.
I think we're all guilty of thinking win-lose as far as financially, win-lose is win-lose. If Apple does well, Samsung does less well. If Samsung wins, Apple's going to lose some. And I think we interpret the rest of the world in dollars and cents.
Yes.
And it doesn't work that way. Numbers, business can work that way. But like you said, if this kid learns, that kid's going to learn more.
That's right.
If you run faster on your track team, you're going to bring some people behind with you who are going to improve their performance. One of them might even pass you, and that doesn't mean you'll lose.
That's right.
And but it's we do have a win-lose mindset,
That's
and it's if I get more, you get less. And
I think it goes back to the fear you were mentioning, though. And it's difficult in this. We live in an individualistic culture, right? And so those whole Americana bootstrap images and, again, I do this, it's mine. It's not necessarily serving us very well. And ultimately, again, it takes concerted effort to rethink a lot of the fears that are happening within us and say, maybe there's a different way. And maybe, again, if we're all doing well and we're listening well, even if we just stop and listen and be present with one another and be curious, intellectual curiosity is a great thing, right? Instead of saying, well, I think this way and I'm staunch about it and this is my position and I'm right, maybe there isn't necessarily a right. Maybe there's a lot of different lenses in which we can look at things And maybe we could say, we fundamentally disagree on a position perhaps, but I'm curious, how did you arrive at the decision you made, and what influenced you, and why do you believe that way? And instead we get very, very defensive. And I think, again, that's being modeled so intensely all around us that that's become the norm. And I think it's quite unhelpful and it's quite damaging.
And in the political arena, it's not okay to change your mind, even if you have new information. They'll accuse you of flip-flop. So there you go.
That's
you're
the
standing your
classic
ground.
dirty trick of the politicians. Oh, you're a flip-flopper, and that's always the big accusation. But what that actually shows is a nimbleness, right? That part of being intellectual, and I don't want to say educated, because education doesn't mean we're smart, but being curious and being, drawn to this mindfulness and this awareness of oneself and how we think of ourselves.
It is accumulating more information too, though, which will change your mind.
It can, yeah, but it's being open and fluid to say, I'm able to make a decision. Maybe I made a decision when I was at a certain point because I didn't have that information, but now that I do, I can take it and look at it a little bit differently.
Not formally educated, but more informed.
Yes, yes. And I think it goes back to the sourcing, are we getting our looking at one news outlet over the other? Or are we even looking at, think about research. Here's a great example. Or how about this? How about if you see a commercial for medication, which we always do. We're one of 2 countries that allow direct-to-consumer ads.
As in Australia.
Right?
Yep.
And so what do? We get these messages, okay, if you've got this problem, you take this medication. Then they kind of mumble the side effects, forget about the constipation, weight gain, and diarrhea, right? And then, that's the information. But we don't see commercials for walking. We don't see commercials for what we call lifestyle medicine, which is getting the proper sleep, nutrition, hydration, positive thinking. And instead, we're inundated with these things that, again, don't give us that full picture and story. So we have to think about, okay, who's selling us something here? Is it a certain research firm or company that wants us to believe a certain thing? Or it could be an academic article even, and it's not peer-reviewed, which means it really hasn't gone through the rigor that it needs to be credible. So we have to think about that. And we can't let our opinions be based on the opinions of others, which I think is very likely to happen.
And so many reputable research institutes now are funded basically to come to this, find all the research you can to come up with this conclusion. The conclusion comes before the research.
It wags they say the tail wags the dog.
Yeah.
But it's difficult for people to take the time to actually find out where their information comes from. They're just so busy.
That's right.
They don't take the time to do that. I wish it was more transparent that, hey, this is where this information's coming from.
That's
so
right.
You can be more informed in how you react to that information.
And luckily, what's wonderful, I've been doing a lot of research in this area because I've been looking at critical thinking, and really we're making it a huge priority at Northeastern, and it's something I'm writing a lot about right now. And there's even a lot of outlets out there like Positive News Stories that are giving a fuller picture. There's a website out there that shows worldwide global data and the outcomes, and they're certainly showing the disparities, but also all the progress that's been made. So you're right, though, the number one sabotager of this is time. Think about it, your Facebook feeds comes up. This is like the case of the avocado pit that I think about, but I saw this thing, it was like, you can take because I love avocado. Do you guys like avocado as much as I do? Yeah. So, it tells you can take the pit and you can cook it and you can grind it up, and like it gives you this whole sensory thing where you think if you eat this, you're gonna live like an extra 50 years. Then you see like all the comments, it's like, don't eat it, you'll get cancer. So it's like this whole feud on Facebook about the silly avocado pit, right? But it made me laugh because at first, as soon as I saw the video, I was ready to go bake that pit, But it's this whole thing of we're just getting these, what do they call them, memes on Facebook, right? We're getting these quick little things, they trigger something us, we grab it, we go, we own it as fact, and we're not challenging that. And I think that's, again, something where we have to start to slow down a little bit, or at least speed up to the resources that are more credible and that give us that full picture, and not just what we want to hear, or that, confirmation bias in psychology is a fancy way of saying when we have a belief, we only look for the evidence that supports that belief.
That's true.
So what do? We become myopic, right? We become very tunnel visioned. And when you think about it, we then live a life that's very egocentric, or sociocentric. So say we're American, we then think our way is the only way, you know? And there's great things about America, but there's also so much to learn from our friends across the world. And we miss out, you know, when we just stay very insular or very isolated in our own camp, our own ways of thinking. Sometimes it's a little anxiety provoking to step out and learn we're not the only ones, or to be disrupted, or to feel like, oh shoot, now I have to flip-flop. We want to kind of be right. But that black and white thinking really, you know, doesn't lend itself well to our growth and development, and not only our individual potential, but our collective potential.
Before we run out of time, I'm going to change the subject.
Yeah.
Tell us about your fire hats.
Okay.
And your book.
All right, well, I'm going to give you guys, these are my
Okay.
gifts to you, but these are little stress balls, but this
thank
gives
you.
us a little sense of just what we've been talking about today, this global perspective. And my work is centered on mental health integration and access, which is a fancy way of saying, look, we've all got to do better to inform the way we think, to inform our public policies, the way our schools are run, the ways our families do things, so that we, again, are more reasonable with each other, that we're promoting human growth and development. So this is just kind of a way to think about that we're not alone, you know, we're not just in these little bubbles, but we look across the globe and we know there's tremendous stories of hope and resilience, like we've been talking about, but there's also things that need and beg our collective action. So I brought
First
these.
shot of our intro, I don't know if you noticed it, is the globe.
Yes.
Where we zero down to the
I
south
love
coast.
it. I love it. So this is, you know, if you get a little stressed, you can
We're on the
squeeze or we
same
throw it
page.
at each
Okay.
other, maybe, if we don't agree with each other, right?
Yeah.
But the other thing I brought, and I've been thinking about this a lot, so I brought you each your own hard hat, and I'm going to explain. So today, a lot of the risks of, you know, we've been talking about critical thinking, and I'll put mine on too. We've been talking a lot about, you know, this idea that there's a lot of fighting and there's a lot of fear.
I'm angry at your hat, though. You don't have chocolate on there. I noticed you have fruit and...
I know. Well, see, this is my self-care. So
Okay.
when we think about construction workers, right, they wouldn't dream of going on the job site without their protective gear. They need their goggles, they need their hard hats, and they protect against the conditions of the site that could be dangerous. They could get, something could fall on them, they could get electrocuted. In today's society, again, we've been talking about the polarized climate, but in our professional and personal arenas, we're under a tremendous amount of stress. But we often go unprotected. We don't even know it's hitting us, again, until we're in the ER with our heart beating out of our chest, or until we've got the bald spot on top of our head. We don't realize how bad it is. So we also need protection in today's world against the ravages of stress and anxiety. So this is our hard hat, and it's called conscious self-care. And this is actually what I speak about in Reset, in my book. It's a model that I developed that's based on basic science, good common sense, and health principles that says, you know, the way that we think, the way that we eat, sleep, communicate with one another. Think about when you go out to eat, right? Everybody's like this now, right? We even know from a brain science perspective, this is actually propelling us into more depression and anxiety. Never mind the disconnect. You know, we're just so distracted. So our hard
The
hat.
book is, let me throw this
Yeah.
in, the book is a great read. It's
Thank you.
written in very down to earth. It's
Yes.
not written in scientific
It's not my boring white
mumbo-jumbo.
papers.
No, and it's
no.
interactive. It wants you to think about,
Right.
it asks you to think about this and how you can help, you know, release your stress.
It really helps us think about what our hard hat is. You know, what is our conscious self-care? And I wrote it based on my 22 years of experience in mental health, not only as a clinician, as a researcher and professor and all those things, but as a person who's personally battled lifelong anxiety, which has been very difficult. And I've also wrestled with the perfectionism. So as I go out, I speak to many corporations and organizations, schools, and you know, if anyone's interested, they can look to my website, resetyourstress.com, where I have videos and tips and newsletters and ways, again, that we can be more thoughtful in this dialogue that isn't simple. It's not a 5-step thing, but ways that we can connect and take better care of ourselves. And I wrote it with my personal experience in it as well. And as you said, it's something anyone can
It's
read.
down to earth. It's a great read. I would
Thank you.
recommend buying the book version rather than downloading the
ebook.
ebook because there's some great diagrams in here, and the diagrams, for me anyway, it's just tough to go back and forth. You reference the diagrams
Yeah.
to go backwards and pull them up and change the size of the fonts and stuff. So I would get the, next time I do it, I'll get the hardcover.
Well, I brought that today to share with you, so.
Okay.
you can
So
pass it
now on
around.
our hard hats,
Yes.
this is an exercise anybody could do, right?
Yes.
You kind of put the things that you would do for self-care on here to remind you
That's
of what you
right.
need to protect yourself.
That's right. So when I go to organizations, I actually do this as a hands-on activity. So I have a few things here. I have just this little sleep. I don't know if you can see it, but I'm a bear if I don't get my 7 hours of sleep a night, 7 or 8 hours. I love that movie, Elf, the Christmas movie, where they say, I got the full 40 minutes of sleep. And I think that's the condition of today, right? It's, again, we're busy, we're doing the work of multiple people, and we let go of resting our brains and bodies. So sleep is one of mine. Yes, I don't have chocolate, I have the fruit snack, but chocolate, they say, is very good for us too, so no worries. But again, what are we eating?
My drug of choice.
That's your drug of choice. That's a pretty good drug for sure. You know, you call me the obsessive walker runner, so I have that. One of the videos I made on my YouTube channel is take your lunch break. We barrel through our days, right? Never-ending meetings, and we're trying to get through everything. We don't even take our lunch. We don't stop to pause. And if you're like me, sometimes you even hold your breath or you clench, right? And then you realize, why do I have this sense of urgency, right? It's kind of the work-life spillover we're all facing today. But this is about putting on our hard hat, you know, making sure we have our go-to strategies. And that's really what the book is about. It teaches everybody step by step. You know, it's not a prescriptive thing like you've got to do step 1, 2, and 3, but it really allows everybody to develop their own plan. I often say I wish there wasn't a need for my work, and you mentioned that the book was named Motivational Book of 2015, which I got a big kick out of that, and I've appreciated to see, you know, the responses from teenagers. We were talking earlier about the hoops of today and the pressures of today. Or, you know, one of them came to me and said, my mom's making me read Reset as my homework, and it's really helping my anxiety. And then I had my my Lakeville kindergarten teacher who actually lost her husband a couple of years ago. She's in her late 80s, come and say, this really was very transformative, it really helped me. And I think it speaks to the fact that through my whole career as a mental health clinician, I've worked with all ages, all walks of life. I've had a very unique opportunity for people to be brave and share their stories with me. And when people read it, they say, that's me.
Yeah,
You had said that,
I
that
did
was the
that
first
too,
thing you
yeah,
said.
yeah,
And some of
yeah.
my family say, were you talking about me there? So it's kind of fun. You kind of like, your family starts to be on their best behavior when you start writing publicly.
And then there again, you know you're not alone.
Right.
And reading the book, it occurs to me about every other paragraph that I knew that. Why didn't I remember that? And it's
follows
just
through,
things we think we know, and we just don't realize we know them sometimes, and we just have to be reminded of those
That's right.
things. And that's going to do it, because we're out of time again, and this has been delightful.
Thank you so much.
I'm Paul Attender of SouthCoast Matters. I want to thank our guest, Kristen Lee Costa. And I want to thank people at TCAM Studios for their advice and their use of their studios, and their great help.
And look for us on Facebook at South Coast Matters, and also email us at southcoastmatters@gmail.com.
Thank you for viewing.